I think I know most of you. For those that don't know me, I've been a registered nurse now for 46 years. I've been a nurse practitioner for 40 years, and I knew nothing about this stuff for 30 years into my nursing career. They don't teach this stuff in nursing school. They don't teach it in medical school for the most part. In 2004, my dad and my brother both got cancer at the same time. And as fate would have it, I got a call from my dad one Monday morning in October of 2004. He said, "Mark, I need your help." He was 89, living independently in Florida. And those are 5 words I never heard from my dad. He was a very independent man. He outlived my mom, got married, outlived his second wife. He was landed Marines in Iwo Jima. I mean, he was a tough guy. So he didn't ask for help unless he was desperate. And of course, of one weekend, he went from having a pizza party on Friday with his buddies. Saturday, he couldn't get out of bed. Sunday became incontinent. And Monday he said, I just need your help. I had him flown up from Florida the next day, took him to Duke, and he had stage 4 lung cancer with metastasis to his brain. And they said he needed to go on hospice that afternoon. So I set up my master bedroom in my house and moved my dad into my home. And with the help of my 3 teenagers that many of you know, helped me care for my dad for 3 months with the help of Duke Hospice. So he was my first hospice patient. A week after he died, I got a call from my brother Gary, who at the time was a 55-year-old professional golfer, picture of health, ride his bike 30 miles after work just to get some exercise. He was driving his wife to work one morning, doubled over in pain, thought he had a kidney stone. Turned out he had a tumor the size of a tennis ball in his bladder. Had no symptoms until he had pain. They gave him a couple of weeks of chemo, thought they could excise the tumor, but it had metastasized to his intestines. They closed him up and sent him home, and he died 2 months after my dad. He was my second hospice patient. It changed my life, changed my career. And so for the past 15 years, I've been helping sort of pay it forward, training other people how to do this. So this presentation is really a quick overview of really giving you the reality of what we're facing here. And I always like to start out with, picture makes 1,000 words. Think of this lady. What do you think she's experiencing right about now? Total terror, right? What's going to happen? Am I going to survive this? We train our staff with this because this represents pretty much the patients and families that are dealing with this. She has no idea what a beautiful day it is. You know, look at the guy she's attached to. What do you think he's trying to tell her?
Everything's okay.
Everything's okay. We got this. Not his first time out of a plane. That represents hospice and palliative care people who do this every day and know what they're doing and can guide people through that and want to be attached and navigating people through this journey. Because this is our usual response when we get the bad news, right? Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Death is the most inevitable fact of life, and people want to make believe it's not going to happen. You know, if I die, there's no if about it. We're 100% guaranteed. And when you get that news, whether it be you or your loved one, a relative, a friend, all these things are swirling in their head, right? How am I going to die? When am I going to die? Where am I going? What's, you know, all this unknown. And Woody Allen said, "I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens." I put this in because it's really not the fear of death in many cases, especially as Christians, right? We believe there's something after this life. But I always ask the question, you know, what is it you fear about dying? What do you think? We actually hired a marketing company and surveyed hundreds of people in our area who are dying or dealing with death in their families. What do you think the fears are that people, or you will fear when you begin to face the end of your life? Even your loved ones. Being alone. Suffering. Yeah. Well, the survey says, number one fear, 3 out of 4 people fear to dying painfully. In fact, 2/3 of people said dying in pain would be worse than death itself. In fact, I've heard our palliative care doctors, when they're dealing with people with a terminal condition, they ask them a question, what would be worse than death itself to you? Because, you know, think, well, there's nothing worse than death. Really? For some people there is. Which leads us to the second most stated thing, Almost 3 out of 4 people say being a burden to their family or friends, a financial burden, a physical burden. You know, all of those things that people are swirling around in their head. And, you know, the reality is 2.5 million Americans are going to die this year. That means 6,850 people will die today. By the time I finish, another 300 people will die. That's 5 people every minute, someone every 12 seconds. And we only represent 5% of the global population. 158,000 people die every day. 2 people every second are dying around the world. The entire population of Cary dies every single day. So question is, how do you think you're going to die? If you were to look at the newspaper, watch the TV tonight, go on the internet, what's the news telling you? Take COVID out of the picture, right? How are people dying on the news? Yeah, shooting. What else? Car crashes. What else? Terrorist attacks, right? Here, you know, these things, right? Bear attacks, plane crashes, poisoning, shootings, stabbings, fire. The numbers in red are the approximate number of deaths that are caused by these things each year. Add all of this up, and guess what this adds up to? Less than 5% of how Americans die. 95% of the news is this. So what really happens, 9 out of 10 of us in this room will die of a predictable chronic illness. Not from a plane crash or a terrorist attack, not a shark attack, unless you just happen to be stupid enough to go to the Outer Banks at evening time when the sharks are out. This is the facts. Out of the 2.5 million Americans, now COVID is sort of an outlier. I saw this morning 702,000 deaths now due to COVID. So it's now surpassed cancer deaths. So if you don't believe it's real, it's real. 1 out of 4 deaths this year will be cancer-related deaths. 625,000 Americans will die of cancer this year. But more people are going to die of chronic organ failure, COPD, congestive heart failure, renal failure, and liver failure. 825,000 Americans will die of that this year. Equally, and one of the fastest growing causes of death, dementia, Alzheimer's, and what we call debility, diseases of old age. The average life expectancy now about 80 years old. Alzheimer's is now the number 5 killer of Americans and one of the fastest growing causes of death outside of COVID because of the aging of the population. All the accidents only represent 104,000 deaths. The other 112, or about 5%, are the massive heart attacks and strokes. So 9 out of 10, and if you survive your 30s, it's more than 90% of us will die of a predictable chronic illness. Because most of the boneheaded things we do to kill us early, you know, we survive. So what's that mean? There's 1 out of 3 ways you're going to die. With a cancer diagnosis, typically, you know, they start chemotherapy, you get radiation, they may excise a tumor, maybe follow up chemoradiation. And if they can't, quote, cure it, the day's going to come when the oncologist say, I'm sorry, not working. And you have about 3 months at that point till death. Fairly steady and predictable among cancer population. This gentleman has chest pain. He goes to Wake Med. They pump him up with medicine. He bounces back for a couple of months, has another incident. He gets to the hospital, put him on a pacemaker. He goes 2.5 years, has another incident. You know, so each time he's getting weaker and hospitalizations are getting closer. One day he doesn't make it to the hospital. They said, man, you hear about Harry? He had a sudden heart attack. No, he had been dying 4.5 years from chronic congestive heart failure. This lady's, oops, sorry about that. This lady is really worried about it.
Oh, no.
This is the other third. This lady's going to get pneumonia.
Yeah, it's Philbrick.
She'll do okay.
We're not
2 months
muted.
later, she's going to wake up in the middle of the night, think she's 18 at Myrtle Beach and wants to go surfing. She's going to climb out of bed, fall down, and break her hip. And they're going to send her to rehab. What happened? You come on her 101st birthday, they're going to say, Miss Nellie, you're 101. What do you want for breakfast today? We'll get you a special breakfast. I'm hankering one of those Bojangle ham biscuits. She's going to get a Bojangle ham biscuit, choke on that bastard, go to the hospital and die of pneumonia. 9 out of 10 of us has got one of these 3 paths ahead of us. So what's that mean? Death is a slow train coming. In hospice, we're surprised people are surprised they're dying because it doesn't come quickly for most of us. The good news is that's where palliative care and hospice and home health come in, because we can help along that trajectory as long as the family doesn't remain one of the 3 monkeys and admits the fact that they need help.
Well, that's what
So
it is.
me being me, I got to put some bad humor in. One of our doctors said, a patient comes to him and says,
Just not
doc, I want to know,
the video
I bet-
coming through.
excuse me,
reason.
some of you, could you mute, please?
Keeps dropping off.
The patient says to the doctor, I bet you get people every day wanting to know how they're going to die and when they're going to die. He goes, I deal with that all day. He goes, I want to know where I'm going to die. So what do you want to know that for? Because I'm staying as far away from that place as possible. The illusion of control. We asked, where do you want to die? 90% of people just want to die at home. All of us, if we really admit it, hey, I just want to go to bed and not wake up, right? Drift off to the other side of the Jordan. Here's the reality. Half of us will die in hospitals in America. 40% of us who die in a hospital die in intensive care unit, probably physically or chemically restrained so you don't pull the tubes out. 30% of people are now dying in nursing homes. So what's the math there? 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 say this is where they want to die. 8 out of 10 don't get that. Only 20% of Americans get to die at home the way they want to. What's the disconnect? How is that happening? The reality is there's no advanced care planning. We've surveyed the hospitals. Less than 40% of the patients in the local hospitals have a written advanced care plan in place, and they're sitting in a hospital bed. So outside of the hospital, and probably in this room, the numbers would say less than 20% of Americans have a written advanced care plan in place. So what happens when somebody begins going down the tubes? Family goes into panic mode. Do everything you can to save them, whether it's useful or not, whether it extends a life or extends a death. Lack of planning. And there's really 2 things. Advanced care planning is a term for this umbrella of things that you need to prepare. Half of it is the financial part, which you're going to have the wills, the trust, the taxes, that part of it. The other half is your healthcare directives. What do you want? What don't you want? Do you want to be attempted resuscitation or not? At what point don't you want to be resuscitated? This is a whole class in itself. But that's one of the number 1 things. If you do nothing else, letting your doctor and your family know who will make decisions for you if you are incapacitated, no longer can make decisions for yourself. What's called a healthcare power of attorney, which is different than the durable power of attorney, which is the money side of it. You need a healthcare power of attorney. And in North Carolina, if you don't have one, there's a natural pecking order. If you're married, your spouse becomes that. If they can't reach your spouse, your eldest child becomes that. Right. So if your eldest child doesn't have a lick of sense and you haven't designated it, that's what you're going to get. And there's more to it. I'm just glancing over it because there's specific tools. North Carolina has an advanced directive form that can be filled out. There's this blue thing we call the 5 wishes, which is a very practical layman's term. It's a legal document that goes through exactly what you want, what you don't want, how you want to be treated, what funeral arrangements you want, and we can have a class on that. And there's the North Carolina DNR form, which is the bright yellow form in red. That's where a physician would have to sign that you do not want to attempt resuscitation should they find you unconscious. You have to have that original. A copy doesn't do. And we even have one of our staff has it tattooed on her chest, DNR, but they will not accept that as a legal document. The pink form is called the MOST form, medical orders for sustaining treatment at end of life. That incorporates the DNR, but it also has specific check boxes as to what medicines you want or don't want, artificial nutrition or not. The doctor signs it along with you, and it is medical orders. So if you have that form, you go to the hospital, they have the orders that you've agreed with your doctor to walk you through what you want, don't want. Again, that's a whole other. And then there's this conversation starter kit, which helps you have the conversation with your family about serious stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about palliative care. We talk about palliative care, hospice care, home care. What's all this stuff? Well, palliative care is like the large umbrella for comfort care. If you were to read the dictionary definition, to palliate is to relieve or lessen without curing, to mitigate or alleviate. So palliative care focuses on the symptom management issues that people face with a serious chronic or terminal condition. In fact, it's from the root word pallium, which means to cloak. So the idea of palliative care is to cloak somebody in comfort. And that's where the whole comfort care movement came from. Hospice sits within palliative care, and that's for people who have been determined by their physician to have 6 months or less to live. They're declared terminally ill, they qualify for the hospice benefit, and I'll talk more about that. So palliative care, really the goal is to improve the quality of your life for both the patient and the family. So this is a family discussion that we have about helping people, it's provided by a team of doctors, nurses, and other specialists who work with the doctor to provide an extra layer of support. So at Transitions Life Care, we have 13 full-time board certified physicians who are certified in palliative care and hospice. It's a board specialty like cardiology, pulmonology, neurology. We have 18 nurse practitioners who are specially trained to do this, and they have these conversations with the family, a consult. They're brought in by other doctors when someone's stage of illness has progressed to the point where they need to be thinking about comfort measures, symptom management, end of life care. And it can be at any age or any stage of a condition. There's no need to be terminal in order to benefit from palliative care. So we think of this as pre-hospice care when somebody's symptoms begin to be a burden. They got pain, nausea, vomiting, difficulty breathing. They work with your physicians to help care for that. Anyone with a serious illness, they can be receiving curative treatment. So they could be getting chemo, radiation. In fact, sometimes we consult with oncologists because the chemo and radiation are causing symptoms themselves, which need to be mediated through palliative care. And it's a consultative visit by a doctor or nurse practitioner. It's paid under Medicare, 20% copay, just as if you went to a pulmonologist, cardiologist, or anyone else. It's also covered under most all private insurance. And one thing about Transitions Life Care that I work with, we're a private not-for-profit. They've been in business since 1979. They've never charged anybody or turned anyone away based on ability to pay. We're a private nonprofit. We have literally thousands of families in the triangle that support us. We get about $2 million a year to provide care to the indigent and uninsured here. So you don't need money to get this. If you have insurance, we take it. Most people who need palliative care are over 65, so they're on Medicare, which also covers 80%. So who needs palliative care? Basically the people on the 9 out of 10 people as they approach their serious chronic or terminal condition. If you have oncology or cancer and you got a poor prognosis, you have symptoms, pain, digestive problems, those type of things. What I call the time bomb diseases, congestive heart failure, COPD, which is emphysema, renal failure, liver failure, any of these chronic organ conditions that have symptoms that can help be managed. The dementia people who are what are called past a less than FAST 7. FAST stands for the functional assessment staging. There's 7 stages to dementia. That's a whole hour class in itself. But the 7th stage of dementia is when a person is near death. They no longer have intelligible speech. They can't toilet themselves. They can't feed themselves. They can't ambulate. They're basically bedbound. At that stage, they qualify for the full hospice benefit. If they haven't reached that stage and they're not ready for hospice, palliative care can help work with the other doctors to figure out what resources could be put in place to assist the family and also help the family to know when they need to go on to hospice and get the whole team of support. And quite frankly, there are people in that last third bucket of old age. They just got the dwindles, they're getting old, they're dwindling away, and you need help. And palliative care can help figure out what resources in the community, because we have social workers that specialize in dealing with this stage of life. So when you call in a consult, we have a physician or a nurse practitioner who comes in, they identify the goals with the family, they do a comprehensive assessment, and they try to manage the physical symptoms first. Once the physical symptoms are managed, we do psychosocial and spiritual support of the family And we help with the family support systems, meaning our social workers look, do they need Meals on Wheels? Do they need transportation? What other community resources need to be brought in? And they communicate estimated survival, prognostication. That means they let the family know that they have months to live, weeks to live, days to live. Where are they in the spectrum? So the family is preparing properly to get things in place. So the team, doctors, nurses, social workers, and we also have what we call nurse navigators who over the long haul keep in touch with the family and navigate that complex medical system. Because let's face it, average life expectancy is 80 years old. People over 75, ask them who their doctor is. Well, my bowel doctor is Dr. Clark, my neck doctor, Dr. Jones, my heart doctor. They all got 4 or 5 doctors. And sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So these navigators help coordinate the communication with all these people. So before I move on, questions about palliative care? Yeah. Uh-huh.
She has a doctor thinking house.
Uh-huh.
Would she qualify potentially?
Absolutely. And our clinicians go to wherever the patient's located. So we have 2 teams of palliative care clinicians. One we call inpatient, and they work at Wake Med Raleigh Hospital. They're there 6 days a week doing consults within the hospital setting. And we have a whole outpatient team, which go to homes, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and they visit the patient wherever the patient resides. But it's definitely, we work closely with physicians making house calls to collaborate. You know, I think it's always good to have at least a baseline consultative visit to establish, a relationship. And as things change, then that would be a tipping point that they could help you figure out. So I'm going to quickly go through, I know we don't have much time. Home health, basically, key point here, you'll hear home care agencies and home health agencies, 2 different things. Home health agencies that are Medicare, Medicaid certified means they have professional nurses, physical, occupational, and speech therapists. In order to qualify for Medicare under home health, you have to have professional services. Home care agencies, they could be sitters. You may see ads like Visiting Angels, some of these things. They can have sitters. They could have people come in and help do housekeeping, light things for that, walk the dog. 2 different agencies, 2 different services. Home health is geared toward people who have a medical need and need skilled nursing care, like wound changes, dressing changes, patient teaching. CNAs, certified nursing assistants, come in and help assist with bathing, feeding the patient. And the care is episodic. It has to be ordered by a physician. In order to qualify for reimbursement through Medicare or insurance, a physician has to order home health service that it's medically necessary, and it's usually a 60-day episode. So the physician writes an order for home health service with some specific goals to accomplish in the next 60 days. End of 60 days, they reassess. Have the goals been met? They need to be rewritten, or what's next? So that's the key to home. And they must be homebound. Homebound does not mean bedbound. Medicare says to be homebound, it's a considerable taxing effort to leave home. So these patients could still be going to the church. They could go to get their hair done. They could go to their doctors, but they're no longer going on their own steam. They have to have somebody help them out. They may need a walker or oxygen. That qualifies them for home health service. But the 3rd criteria is they have to have something that requires the skill of a trained nurse. I'm a trained nurse and I can feed the dog and I can wash the dishes, but I didn't go to nursing school to learn that. It has to be something medically necessary according to the doctor who writes the order. Questions? I know that's a real quick zip through. Hospice, I think, is really important to understand. It's not a place, but a philosophy of care. Hospice comes to the families, 9 out of 10 people want to die at home. That's our goal. Over 90% of the patients we care for them at home or in a nursing home or assisted living facility. We have a beautiful campus with a beautiful hospice home. It's a 30-bed facility, but think of that as an intensive care unit for people in the last week of life who no longer can be managed at home. That's the purpose of a hospice home. It's like an intensive care unit for the dying. Today, we have over 600 hospice patients we're caring for at transitions. 95% of those people are at home and nursing homes and assisted living. So our staff go out in the community and visit. And we address total pain, which means pain is not physical. The number one fear, dying in pain. Now, as you get into end of life, you realize that pain isn't just physical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's psychosocial, it's financial. And so that's why the team includes social workers, chaplains, and all these other people. Yes. The last what? Yes, you can. You can. Good question. The hospice, I'll talk a little bit about that as I get into this. It's a team approach to caring for patients. And so when the doctor determines, your attending doctor, that you've got 6 months or less to live, they write what's called a certificate of terminal illness. It qualifies you to get hospice care. And then you're assigned a hospice doctor who works in conjunction with your attending physician to work on a medical plan of care. There needs to be a primary caregiver. Who at home is going to be the primary person? Now, I'm the youngest of 7 boys in my family. My dad chose me because I was the only one with a medical background. So I was a primary caregiver. They would hospice communicate with me, and I'd communicate with the family what the plan was. So, the buck has to stop somewhere, because if you've lived in a family with more than one person, communication's a challenge. You're assigned a case manager, which is an RN specially trained in end of life care. The nurse comes in at least once a week to assess the patient, work with your medications, help train the family on how to care for that patient, how to give the medicines, and so on. So it's not like hospice moves in the house and takes over. They train the family how to care for the patient. Your social worker is assigned. All the social workers are master's degrees in social work. They're licensed clinical therapists, and they help do the psychosocial support of that patient, but also the family and anyone who's connected to that patient, dealing with the emotional impact of this, dealing with final arrangements and what the finances are, all of those components. And we have spiritual care counselors. We actually have 17 full-time chaplains on our team. And their job is to help navigate the spiritual distress that people are going through. Our people don't particularly like to be called chaplains because that has a specific Christian connotation. But as you know, in the triangle, we have people from all different faiths, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and so on. So we really focus on life review, that type of thing, meaning of life, helping people navigate, And then you're provided a nurse's aide to do the physical care. I took care of my dad 24 hours a day for about 2 months. One day, the hospice nurse came to visit, and she said, "Mark, you're doing a great job, but it's time for you to step back, quit being a nurse, and be a son. We're going to send the nurse aide in, and she's going to come 3 days a week, and she'll bathe them and feed them and take care of that part of it." And that's really necessary. The other key component is volunteers. And you know Ben Wiest? Ben Wiest was my hospice volunteer for my dad. He was working as a volunteer for Duke Hospice. Ben would come to my house. He'd spend a couple of hours, a couple of days a week, so I could go to Duke Forest and take a hike, get my head cleared, or go grocery shopping for the kids. And he would sit with my dad, and they'd argue politics and watch movies, and it was great. So the volunteers are there to help the family get a break from the intensity of being 24 hours a day in that mode. We have pet volunteers with therapy dogs. We have music volunteers to sing to the patients. So hospice is the only Medicare program that requires the use of volunteers. 5% of all clinical hours have to be provided through volunteer services, because hospice started as a volunteer grassroots movement back in the 70s. They want to maintain community involvement. We have over 300 volunteers at transition who go out and spend time with the families. And Elwood Peters just signed up and went through our training. So anyone who's interested in that, the back of this, transitionslifecare.org, you go on that website, there's a volunteer button. You can sign up to learn more about volunteering. And we have an information session for an hour that goes through all the different types of volunteer opportunities. 4 levels of care in hospice. First level is routine care. 97% of people get routine care, which means our staff come to them wherever they are and tries to keep them comfortable to the last breath. Second is respite care. It's exhausting to care for somebody 24 hours a day. The reality is 85% of people who are in hospice are over 65 years old, which means usually their spouse and caregivers are over 65. And it's very intense caring for somebody that frequently. Hospice and Medicare allows us to take the patient out of the house, move them to our hospice home or a nursing home for 5 days at a time so the family can get physical and emotional rest. After 5 days, the patient goes home, they start up again. If they get exhausted, we take the patient away. So it's a safety valve to release the families. Third level is called continuous crisis care. Every once in a while, the patient will get into crisis. Often it's because the family's afraid to give morphine, or they don't give the proper medicine. Then they get in a pain crisis, which is the worst fear. And then they begin to panic. Instead of calling 911, you call hospice. We have one-on-one nurses who go in to mediate a crisis. And they sit there, they try to stabilize that patient, get them comfortable, keep them out of the hospital so they can be at home. If they can't get them stabilized, they go to the fourth level of care, which is general inpatient care, which is our hospice home, which is a beautiful 30-bed facility. And it's set up so that people's families can stay with them 24 hours a day, 24-hour nursing care, everything's taken care of. And that's where usually we average about 6 days here. 75% of the people who get to that stage are really in the last week of life. They come to the hospice home, our clinicians get them comfortable, they relax, and they die. About 1 in 4 will get comfortable, stabilized, still have enough strength to get home, so we send them home to die if that's what they want to do. And only 5% of people ever get to that point. So 95 times out of 100, we can keep that person comfortable at home. That's where they want to be. And that's where we manage the symptoms that can't be managed at home. And they require 24-hour nursing supervision. Just so you know, we have a program called Transitions Kids. We're the only pediatric palliative care and hospice program in this region. We have 70 to 80 children a day that we're caring for who are terminally ill. Specialized team of pediatric doctors, nurses, and social workers and chaplains to work just with families with kids who are dying. After you lose somebody, hospice provides 13 months of grief support. It's a free service. Everybody gets it. We have 7 full-time grief counselors on staff. All families get monthly newsletters from us with specific readings to where they are in the grief journey. We also have one-on-one counseling sessions. We have 7 full-time grief counselors. All of our grief services are open to anyone in the community free of charge. We raise about $650,000 a year to provide free grief support, and it's all through gifts in the community of people who've gone through it and are supporting other people to go through it. We also have small group counseling. So we have, now it's all virtual, but there'll be support groups for loss of a spouse or loss of a child or loss of a sibling. And we have support groups have similar losses that navigate through this. And we also have grief specific groups like that, and a memorial service. We do annual memorial services. 400 or 500 families will come out to honor their loved ones. And we have a kids camp specifically for grief related losses that children have gone through. Typically they come to our campus. We have a pizza party on Friday night. They have 30 or so kids come who've all lost a parent or a sibling or a grandparent. They have a pizza party. We divide them into age appropriate groups, and then they spend the next day out at Lake Wheeler doing grief specific journeys with each other. It's the first time these kids realize they're not the only one going through it. The last group, we had 32 children. 17 of these kids were there because their parents either committed suicide or died of a drug overdose. So half of the children's losses we deal with now are traumatic overdoses and suicides, and it's getting worse. Any questions about that?
Feel
Yes. Well, yeah, we get referrals from the primary doctor, and then we validate. Our hospice physicians will validate whether the person qualifies.
Is there much of a miss here?
I would say maybe 10 or 20%.
Okay.
a lot of the doctors we work with regularly get a good feel for this, but there are clinicians that don't deal with death on a regular basis. There was a study in the Journal of Oncology 5 years ago, stage 4 lung cancer patients, half got aggressive chemotherapy. It was a large cohort, half got hospice only. 3 things came out of the study. One, the hospice patients on average lived 34 days longer than the chemo patients. So they realized that stage 4 lung cancer with aggressive chemo was not valid. I mean, it wasn't helpful for most of these patients because they didn't eat as much, they didn't ambulate as much, they were debilitated, and they basically gave up. The second part, they asked the oncologist to guess when the person would die. On average, the oncologist overestimated survival by 5 months. So problem is you got a 6-month benefit, and they were waiting until the very end. And it was crisis management. Once the person was in crisis, we get a referral. The third and most startling was that the better the oncologist knew their patient, the worse they were at guessing when they would die. So they determined that oncologists were human beings, and that they got attached to the patients or they lost objectivity. And so now almost half of our palliative care consults come through oncology because they want a second opinion as they begin to see the person decline. So it is a challenge because prognostication is not an easy thing. But our clinicians last year did over 8,500 consults for end of life. So when you're doing that many, you develop a sixth sense.
Your own stats on how active you are at 6 months.
Yeah. The challenge though is not getting the referrals far enough out in advance. In fact, of the patients we admit today, a third will be dead in less than a week. They're referred to us. The other third, less than 30 days. So 2/3 of the people that we got 600 patients today. By this time next month, 400 of those will have died. And so unfortunately, a lot of this becomes crisis management because the families don't want to admit it. Sometimes the patient doesn't want to obviously face their dying, or they don't want strangers coming into the home, and it's okay, that's their choice. But more often it's the families who, we're praying for a miracle, God's going to take care of this, until it's in crisis mode. And when you go to crisis mode, it's like, do whatever you can. They end up in the hospital where they don't want to be. They rack up these huge bills on, futile care. And unfortunately, we just talked about the third factor, which is the medical community itself is notoriously poor at guessing when somebody is going to die. So it's a challenge. Yeah.
So we have an appointment actually on Friday with transition for a family member in about a primary caregiver. And I have a hunch I'm going to do that person. And so I don't like, does the social worker help with that? I just feel like I cry at everything anyway.
Right.
And I think, I just emotionally, I'm not sure how I can personally handle.
Right. Yeah, that definitely your nurse case manager and your social worker would be very helpful in that, and the spiritual care person. Even though, I know how many of us feel about our own faith, that these people deal with this all the time. And the existential struggle of losing a loved one, having perspective from somebody who is all these chaplains, spiritual care people have master's degrees, they're MDivs, and they also have residency training as chaplains in hospitals. So they all have at least a year of chaplaincy training on top of it. So they're very good and they're very objective, and they really get down to the root of the emotional component of this.
Do we have those defense cases where people get to miraculously recovered and live another 10 years?
Not 10 years. We're not that far off, but I would say anywhere up to 20% of nursing home patients that we get referred, they'll literally look like they're on death's door. And then hospice comes in, they realize, oh my gosh, they're on 15 meds. They don't need these 6 meds. And all of a sudden now the patient's waking up. They're getting regular nursing visits and CNA attention. They got people praying with them and they bounce back. It's like a miracle. And then 6 months into this, then the family's told, hey, they got to graduate from hospice. We can't keep them on unless they're getting worse. And so they get discharged. Some families get really angry. It's like, when you came in, everything got good. And so when we leave, eventually they decline again. So sometimes it is a cycle. We had one lady, I remember, she was admitted at 100 that they thought she was dying. And same thing, she kept on, tanking, and then whoop, she bounced back. 104, 4 years later, she was still coming and going. In fact, the story was on her 104th birthday, someone said, "How are you feeling?" And she says, "I don't feel a day over 100. But yes, you can graduate from hospice. The key to it is after 6 months, a physician has to examine the patient and determine whether they think they, at that point, have less than 6 months. And then it's every 60 days that doctor or nurse practitioner has to reevaluate, see if they're still declining. If they're getting better, they really don't need the support. Well, they frankly do need the support, but Medicare is not going to pay for it if they're getting better. Yes.
Phil, you have to-
It depends on the illness itself. Somewhere around 75% of cancer patients will have mild to moderate pain. Maybe 25% will experience severe pain. There are some illnesses, like if I had my choice, I'd die of renal failure, because they basically go into a coma, they lapse for about 2 weeks and then die in their sleep. So it really depends upon the disease state they're in. It's not an easy answer. The other thing is we have a whole hour class on myths and facts of morphine, because there's so many misconceptions. Morphine is a good, safe drug, and administered properly is a good way to help people. We don't put people to sleep. The hospice, they say that hospice came on next week, grandma was dead. They just drugged her to death. Well, they waited the last week that she was dying before they called for help, and then someone's going to give that last dose. I think, yes, one more question. Yes. Yeah, there's several different drugs that we use. There's artificial opioids that we can use. Fentanyl patches. We use fentanyl patches. The trick to fentanyl, you can't be like an emaciated patient wearing a patch, because fentanyl gets absorbed through the fat layer in the body. And if you don't have any fat, it can't absorb properly. We also use methadone, which is, most people think of methadone, that's what you give heroin addicts to get off of heroin, but it's actually a very effective drug for pain when regulated properly. It's also used for people in liver failure, because most of these drugs, opioids, get absorbed through the liver, whereas methadone gets absorbed through the gut or the intestine. So it's an alternate route to medicate people who have liver problems. Okay. There's some questions on the, yes, Patricia.
I want to know, when you talk about the two kinds of cares, you said home health and professional nursing. I didn't get the difference.
Home health and home care agencies. The word health is the key. If it's a certified home health agency, that means they must have nurses, occupational, speech, and physical therapies. A home care agency may have that, but they may not have that. Many of the home care agencies are private entities, and not that they're bad services, they're a different type of service. Because many, like if you have a dementia patient that doesn't have a medical need, home health is not going to be paid for by Medicare because they have no medical need. But a home care agency could help you with that, caring for that loved one, personal care, that type of thing. Anyone else? Yes.
Hey, Mark, this is Daryl. Just a quick question. I know that you guys kind of service the Triangle area. So for, my parents are in Lynchburg, Virginia. Is it kind of common to be able to find like services like this anywhere in the?
Yeah. what I recommend is there's a website, and it's the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, but it's nhpco.org. nhpco.org. You go to that, you click on find a provider, you type in the zip code, and it will pull up all the hospice providers in that area. Probably 95% of the population of America now is within 30 to 60 minutes of a hospice provider. There's over 5,000 hospices now in the United States. The question was asked about, what about people who aren't disciples? We unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever side you're on, we don't do deathbed confessions or conversions or any of that kind of stuff. Our role and goal is to help that person come to whatever meaning at end of life they can navigate at that stage of life. And a lot of it is for the people who are surrounding that person. You know, hospice and end of life bring out the best in some families and the worst in others. I've literally had people arguing over the bed, who's going to get the freaking coffee pot when grandma dies. You know, you see all sorts of crazy stuff. So
So if I can step in a minute, and we'll close out here. Two thoughts come to mind. One, thank you. Amazing wealth of knowledge. And I went through every screen and I couldn't find one thing that we just haven't lived. Not one. I mean, every slide, I'm like, yep. What an expertise. What an amazing available thing to us. Now, second thing I want to say is, we knew when we started this class, it's a class I wanted to do for years, honestly. And I kind of knew going in, this is what's going to happen. I'd like to sit here for hours with Mark, having been through it, and ask more questions and get deeper. I'm going to have to figure that out. I'm going to sit with Mark, and I'm sure Gary the same way. And I don't know about funerals and wills, but we'll see where that goes. We wanted this to be, I've already actually talked to several church leaders in North Carolina and one outside of North Carolina going, we want to know how that goes. We're thinking a weekend, 4 or 5 hour seminar, and you bring your guys, because we're all going through this. I had one call me today. I want to know how that goes because I'm going to schedule you guys. Now, I don't know if Mark can do that or Gary. I thought this might happen, that we would get in here and go, I got 50 more questions. There's so much more. And again, having just lived through it, I even got questions and things and things that, you brought up that I'm like, oh, that was what was going on. But they're so good at what they do. And so thank you, Mark. And we'll figure out, we'll talk more. I'm going to get with the guys and go, what are our possibilities here to help folks in an ongoing way? Because I'm assuming most of you are in here because you have someone elderly and you're thinking this is coming. Let me just show of hands. Are you in here because of that? Okay, just about everybody in here. Okay. And you're going to go through it. We're going through it. And this expertise was amazing. So I want to figure out a way to extend this. I don't have that figured out right now. But there's a lot we can give to our church here with the expertise of brothers and sisters that do this every day. And so I don't want to just come up and shut it down. Sorry, Mark.
I was going to say,
this, but
at the back
please.
of this, it says transitionlifecare.org. If you want to reach me, my email is mphilbrick, PHILbrick, philbrick@transitionlife.org. Just let me know that you're in the class, what questions you have, and your phone number so I can call you back. Yeah. Sure. Sure. As long as you just you have my email, mphilbrick@transition. You email me and I'll email this back to you. Yeah. I see Tawana has her hand up. We'll let people go. I'll stay here to answer questions afterwards. I'm not
Yeah,
in a rush.
and we'll do the same thing. If you want to stay for a little bit, again, I don't think any of us are rushing off to go get kids, but we all agreed that we were going to be sensitive to time for that reason. You want to hang around a little while, talk to Mark. If folks are online, when I ask a question, we're going to figure out a way to continue this.
Sure.
I'll work with you on that. But again, thank you, Mark. What a fantastic job. What a great brother to have in our church as a resource. Guys, thank you. Stay around as long as you'd like. Some folks online may stay a
I
little
got
bit,
4
but
hands up here.
4 hands. Mark will answer a few questions there. And then
Tawana?